The stitches in my side were 3 days old when my stepmother walked into my hospital room and told me I had 48 hours to pay rent or find somewhere else to live. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, those ugly acoustic ones with the little holes, and thinking, this can't be real. I was hooked up to a drip. I had a drain in my side from the surgery, and the painkillers they'd given me made everything feel slightly underwater. And there she was, standing at the foot of my bed in her wool coat, purse tucked under her arm like she'd just stopped by between errands. "Your father wants me to remind you that the first is coming up," she said. "He doesn't want things to get awkward." I said her name. I said it slowly, the way you talk to someone when you genuinely cannot believe what they're saying. "I'm in the hospital. I know where you are," she said. "We all make choices." She left before I could say anything else. The nurse who had been checking my IV line on the other side of the curtain didn't say a word. I heard her footsteps pause, then continue. I lay there with the monitor beeping and the fluorescent lights humming and the sound of a television somewhere down the hall, and I cried in that quiet way where you're not sure you're actually crying until you feel the wet on your pillow. Let me back up. My name is Meg. I'm 31 years old. I work in project coordination for a mid-sized construction firm in Hamilton, Ontario, and until 8 months ago, I was living in my father's house on a street lined with old maples in the West End. I had my own room, a bathroom I shared with no one, and an arrangement with my father that I paid $800 a month toward household expenses. He called it rent. I called it peacekeeping. It was cheaper than anything in the city and close enough to my office that I could bike in good weather, and after my mom died 4 years ago, I think part of me wanted to stay close to the place where she had lived, even if that place no longer felt like hers at all. My father remarried 18 months after my mother's funeral, the woman he married. I'll call her what she was to me, which is my stepmother, had moved into our house within the year, and she came with opinions about the way I loaded the dishwasher, about my work schedule, about the fact that I hadn't moved out yet, a point she made in the pleasant, indirect way that people use when they want to wound you without accountability. My father had always been a difficult man. Not violent, not when I was growing up. More the kind of difficult that comes from ego, from the belief that his way was the obvious and only way and that disagreeing with him was a form of disrespect. My mother had known how to manage him. She had a gift for it. After she was gone, I didn't have anyone in the house on my side, and the distance between me and my father grew in the slow, quiet way that distances do when nobody is trying to close them. The accident happened in February. Black ice, a residential street, a delivery van that came through a stop sign. I don't remember the impact. I remember the cold and then the inside of an ambulance and a paramedic saying my name. I had 2 fractured ribs, a lacerated spleen, and a concussion that kept me confused for the first 36 hours. My father came to the hospital that first night. He stood at the side of my bed and he looked at me, and I remember thinking, he looks more inconvenienced than scared. He didn't stay long. My stepmother's visit on day 3 was the first time either of them had come back. When I was discharged, I had nowhere to go but home. I couldn't drive. I couldn't lift anything heavier than a kettle. The firm had given me 2 weeks medical leave and I was supposed to be resting, recovering, not walking up and down stairs more than necessary. I came home to find that my room had been partially cleared while I was in hospital. A box of my books in the hallway, my desk pushed toward the wall to make room for a treadmill my stepmother had apparently ordered online. I asked my father about it that evening. He was at the kitchen table with the newspaper. "We've been talking about a home gym," he said, without looking up. "That's my room," I said. He turned a page. "You're 31 years old, Margaret." He only called me Margaret when he wanted me to feel like a problem. The $800 was due on the 1st. I didn't have it. Not because I'm irresponsible, but because my direct deposit hadn't hit yet, and my debit card had been in my jacket during the accident, and the jacket had been cut off me by the paramedics. I'd been dealing with my bank to get a replacement card, which was taking longer than it should have. I explained this to my father. He listened with the same expression he'd used for my entire childhood when I was explaining something he had decided not to care about. "Talk to your stepmother," he said. "She manages the household finances now." My stepmother told me that late payment wasn't something they could accommodate. She said it with a smile. I borrowed the money from my closest friend, a woman I've known since first year university. I transferred it to my father's account that night with a note that just said February. I screenshot the confirmation and saved it. I'm not entirely sure why I did that. Some animal instinct maybe. Something in the house had started to feel unstable in a way I couldn't name. The next 3 weeks were the worst of my life, and I've had some genuinely bad weeks. I found out about the credit card by accident. I was looking for a document in my stepmother's home office. She had asked me to retrieve a folder from the top shelf while she was out, because I was taller than her and she hadn't thought about the fact that I'd find the mail underneath it. There was an envelope addressed to me from a financial institution I'd never had an account with. I opened it standing right there in the office. It was a statement. A Visa card in my name, opened 8 months prior with a balance of $6,040. I sat down on the floor. I went through the transactions line by line. Grocery stores, a furniture retailer, Canadian Tire, Home Depot. The treadmill, I realized. I found the charge from the same week it appeared in my room. Someone had used my identity to open a card and furnish my father's house. I took a photo of every page on my phone before I put the envelope back. I didn't say anything that night, or the next day. I went to my room and I sat on my bed and I thought very carefully about what I was doing and what I needed to do. I called my bank. I called the credit bureau. I called Service Canada to understand what a fraud report would involve. I called the non-emergency police line, and I spoke to an officer who was patient and thorough, and who explained to me exactly what documentation I would need. I wrote everything down in a notes app on my phone, organized by date, with screenshots attached to each entry. I also, quietly, started looking for apartments. I did not tell my father or my stepmother any of this. I made my calls from my car, parked down the street. I ordered a new laptop. Mine had disappeared from my room during the hospital stay, and when I asked about it, my stepmother said she hadn't seen it, and I had it shipped to my friend's address. I started slowly, carefully, moving the things that mattered to me out of the house. A bath to my friend's place every few days. Things I could carry without it being obvious. The night everything broke open was a Thursday in March. I was eating dinner alone in my room. I had stopped eating with my father and stepmother weeks earlier when I heard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen. The walls in that house were never thick. I heard my stepmother say my name, and then I heard my father say, "She's got the money from the firm. She won't know how to fight it." I heard the word convenient, and then the word accident, and my whole body went cold. I opened my door quietly. I stood in the hall. What I heard, pieced together over the next 10 minutes, was this. My stepmother had contacted my employer. I didn't know this yet. I would find out 2 days later. But she had called the firm and implied, with no evidence and in careful enough language to be technically deniable, that I had been falsifying expense reports. She knew the name of my direct supervisor. She knew details about my projects that she could only have gotten from documents I had brought home. My laptop. She had gone through my laptop. My father's voice, low and certain. By the time she figures it out, we'll have what we need. I went back into my room and I sat on my bed and I did not cry. I was past crying. I felt something settle in me like concrete. The next morning, I called the police. Not the non-emergency line this time. I asked to file a formal report for identity fraud and theft. The officer who came to my friend's house where I had gone that morning with 2 bags and my car was a woman who seemed tired but who listened to everything I said without interrupting. I showed her the photos of the credit card statement. I showed her the screenshots of my e-transfer payments. I showed her a photo of my missing laptop, which I still had from when I'd used it to set up a new work account 6 months earlier. She took notes. She took copies of everything. I also, at her suggestion, contacted the Canada Revenue Agency to flag potential fraud on my tax files. And I called the financial institution directly to report the fraudulent account. My employer called me that afternoon. My supervisor, not HR, that told me something. She said she'd received an anonymous complaint and that she wanted to speak with me before anything was escalated. I drove to the office. I brought my work files, my project logs, every email chain I had saved. I had kept good records. I'd always kept good records. By the end of the meeting, my supervisor had 2 printed copies of a memo she'd written clearing my file, and the anonymous complaint had been forwarded to the firm's legal team because, as my supervisor put it, a false report filed with the intent to damage a professional's employment is not something they took lightly. I didn't go back to my father's house. A week later, 2 officers attended the address to speak with my father and stepmother. I know this because I was contacted afterward and told that both individuals had agreed to an interview. I know that the fraudulent credit card account was confirmed as opened without my consent, using documents that would have been accessible in the home. I know that charges were laid. What I didn't expect, and what took another 4 months to fully understand, was the paper trail that unraveled once investigators started pulling on the thread. My mother had a small life insurance policy. She had named me as secondary beneficiary, with my father as primary. That's normal. What wasn't normal was what the insurance company found when my father had filed a claim: discrepancies in the paperwork, dates that didn't align, a witness signature that investigators could not verify. I don't want to say more than I know for certain because I've learned to be careful about that. What I can say is that there was an investigation, and that the investigation was ongoing for several months, and that my father's legal situation became considerably more complicated in ways that had nothing to do with the credit card. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the north end of Hamilton in April. It was the ground floor of an older house with a big bay window and a landlord who fixed things quickly and a radiator that clanked every morning at 6, but that I came to find almost comforting. The rent was $1,450 a month. I had to be careful with my budget for a while. I brought home my lunch. I didn't buy anything I didn't need. My friend helped me move in. She brought her truck and her husband, and they carried my boxes up the front walk, and we ate pizza on the floor because I didn't have a table yet. And at some point in the evening, her husband asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, and then had to think about whether that was true. It was. Mostly, it was becoming true. The court process was slow, the way these things are. There were delays and continuances, and a lot of sitting in waiting rooms under fluorescent lights that reminded me unpleasantly of the hospital. My stepmother's lawyer tried a number of angles. My father said very little publicly. His lawyer said more. In the end, my stepmother was convicted of fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. She was sentenced to 18 months, with a restitution order covering the outstanding balance on the fraudulent account plus legal and administrative costs I had incurred. My father pleaded guilty to a lesser charge related to the financial scheme and received a conditional sentence with strict terms. The insurance matter was referred separately, and I've been told to expect that process to take another year at minimum. At the sentencing hearing, I was permitted to read a victim impact statement. I had worked on it for 3 weeks. I kept cutting it down and then adding things back. What I finally read was about 8 minutes long. I talked about my mother, and about what it had meant to live in her house after she was gone, and about what it meant to discover that the people who were supposed to be my family had seen that grief as an opportunity. I didn't perform it. I read it the way I'd written it, plainly, with some pauses where I needed them. My father did not look at me the whole time. That evening I drove home through the city with the windows down even though it was cold, and I stopped and got a coffee from a drive-thru and sat in the parking lot for a while doing nothing in particular. The maple trees on my father's street would be starting to bud by now, I thought. My mother used to love that street in spring. I thought about her for a while, alone in that parking lot. And then I finished my coffee and I drove home. My apartment was the same as I'd left it 2 hours ago. The bay window let in the last of the evening light. The radiator was quiet. On the counter, there was a small ceramic pot my friend had given me as a housewarming gift, with a plant in it that I'd somehow managed to keep alive for 6 weeks, which felt like its own kind of accomplishment. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, just standing there in the quiet. It was mine. All of it. The quiet, the light, the plant on the counter, the coffee going cold in my hand. Nobody could walk in and take it. Nobody could tell me what I owed or when to pay it, or that I should be somewhere other than where I was. For a long time, I had thought of leaving as failure. Now I understood it was the only thing I had ever really done for myself. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I transfer the rent on the first of every month and say nothing about the credit card statement and tell myself it's easier this way, that family is complicated, that maybe I'm reading it wrong. I almost live that version. I almost let it happen. What I've come to understand is that the choices my stepmother made, opening an account in my name, going through my laptop, calling my employer, those weren't impulsive. They were calculated. And calculation like that doesn't appear out of nowhere. It grows in the space that silence creates. Every time I paid without questioning, every time I let a comment slide at the dinner table, every time I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, I was, without meaning to, making more room for it. I don't say that to blame myself. I say it because I think it's true. And I've found that the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only thing that actually helps. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the fact that when I found that envelope, I didn't put it back and pretend. I photographed every page. I wrote things down. I made phone calls from my car because I knew the house wasn't safe. I had always been someone who kept records, who read the fine print, who asked the next question. And for a long time, I thought that was just a personality quirk. Slightly neurotic, mildly embarrassing. It turned out to be the thing that gave me a case. There's something I want to say about that, about knowing how to think clearly when everything feels like it's collapsing. It's not a natural talent. It's a practice. It comes from years of small decisions, reading the document before you sign it, asking what happens if, keeping the receipt. None of those feel like survival skills in the moment. They feel like being fussy. But they compound. And when the moment comes where you actually need them, they're there. The harder thing, the thing that took me longer, was deciding that I was worth defending in the first place, that I didn't have to earn the right to my own name, my own credit, my own room. My father had spent years making me feel like my presence in that house was a burden I owed him for. And I had accepted that framing for so long that it had started to feel like the truth. Walking away from it wasn't a single brave moment. It was a slow, grinding process of choosing again and again to act as though I mattered, even when I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Mick sat in a parking lot the night of the sentencing and thought about her mother. I did that. I finished a drive-through coffee and drove home and stood in my apartment and felt the quiet of a place that was mine. That quiet cost something. It cost years of discomfort and one very bad winter and a lot of phone calls I didn't want to make. But nothing real is free. And I think the things you have to fight for, the apartment, the cleared file at work, the statement read aloud in a courtroom, those are the things you actually keep. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be willing to do the next right thing, even when your hands are shaking.